Good afternoon. First, I'd like to recognize some members of my team: Bob Stevens, my Chief Legal Counsel; Bill Daltrich, my Secretary of Office Administration; Susan Klutz, my Secretary of Cultural Resources; Thomas Stiff, my Chief of Staff; and Sharon Decker, my Commerce Secretary, along with Art Pope, my Budget Director. It's good to have you all here today, and a great budget team to the left. Y'all need to give them a round of applause for their great work. Before I get started, I do want to let everyone know that my thoughts and prayers are with the family of Keith Crisco. Keith was someone that I got to know when I was mayor of Charlotte, and even though he was a Pfeiffer graduate, as I always told him, and I was a Catawba graduate, we just had a great relationship. And I'm just thinking about his entire family in the area of Asheboro and all of the state, because he had established so many friendships throughout this state. And we just want to let his family know that we're really thinking about him. And this state has lost a tremendous public servant. I'd like to also take this time to congratulate the House and Senate on the opening of the first day of the short session. I want to especially congratulate them for taking immediate action on the coal ash bill. And we look forward to working with them on that bill and look for any ways we can improve it. We welcome them, but we're very pleased that the governor's bill was introduced, and I'd especially like to thank Phil Berger and Tom Apicdakis for their leadership in that effort. I also look forward to working with the legislature over the coming weeks and months, and I'm confident that this will be a short yet very productive session. We started this budget process back in December when I asked my cabinet members, the Council of State, and other state government agencies to find 2% savings in each of their respective areas. They all submitted the savings in February, and ever since then there has been ongoing dialogue. In fact, myself and the budget team to my left and Art Pope to my right, our great budget director, have literally spent hours upon hours almost every day reviewing about every line on the budget, about anything over about $100,000 of a $20 billion budget. We've had to make some very difficult decisions, which we think will have a positive impact on the future. This budget proposal has already been shared with top budget legislators in both the House and the Senate, and therefore nothing in our budget should come as a surprise. There has been a lot of opportunity for all those impacted by the budget to provide us input, because we had many meetings with all those people who may be impacted by our decisions. Again, guiding a good part of that discussion and this process was our budget director, Art Pope. Again, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate his knowledge, his wisdom, his leadership, and the state is very fortunate that he has dedicated himself to public service for $1 a year. In fact, I was teasing him earlier. Part of our budget increase is a salary increase is $1,000 increase, and that means the media will say Art Pope gets 1,000% increase. But I don't think he'll accept it. But without his knowledge and experience in accounting aptitude, I don't think we'd be where we are today. So Art, special thanks. And I also want to let you know my prayers are with your mom. I know you and your family are also going through a very difficult time. And as we stand here, his mom is fighting a very terrible illness. And I just want to let you know the sacrifice you've made during that time and working on the budget has been the ultimate sacrifice, and I really do appreciate it. Now, I want to keep my remarks short today and fairly quick, and I'm going to give Art the opportunity to also make some comments, and then we'll take a few questions afterwards. But I want to highlight some of the budget priorities that complement some of the priorities of this administration. Those priorities including increasing the opportunity of our citizens to get jobs, enhancing the great quality of life that we have here in North Carolina, and also keeping our state affordable. So opportunity, quality of life, and affordability. And let me first talk about opportunity and talk about a subject that's on the tips of everyone's tongue, and that's trying to help the opportunity of teachers to have a career, not just in the short term, but in the long term. In our budget, our base pay proposal will be kept in there and will ensure that no state-funded teacher will make less than $35,000, within the next 2 years. In addition, an average of 2% increase for all state-funded teachers will be implemented across North Carolina if this budget is approved. And third, an initial investment in the Career Pathways for Teachers framework that focuses on long-term achievement for both students and for teachers. We are also proposing an investment that gives teacher raises when they have an advanced degree in the subjects that they teach. State employees, another group of people that I care desperately about. I've been working with them hand in hand now for the past 14 or 15 months. And I'm proud to announce, like we did a week ago, that state employees will receive an average of a 2% raise, including benefits. Now, some state employees also, such as magistrates and state highway patrol troopers, will also receive even more of a raise than 2%, based upon the pay structures that we began implementing earlier this year. Well, let's also talk more about education funding. Sue Breckenridge, you're in the audience, and Eric Goodcan have been great advisors to me, and I really appreciate their help. But pre-K funding, something Aldona Voss, our Secretary of Health and Human Services, pressed me again, is that she wanted additional resources for pre-K funding. And we have increased pre-K funding by $3.6 million. Another area that Eric Goodcan and the superintendent of schools, June Atkinson, and the chairman of the schools pressed me on hard was double the textbook funding that's currently available. And we've talked about that in the press conference at North Carolina A&T University this past week. Community colleges continue to be a very important part of our job creation and our education for the future. And we're going to continue to implement the concept of closing the skills gap. And we will reinvest savings in high-demand programs such as advanced manufacturing and health science programs so our students can find jobs and our employers can find the skilled workforce and talent they need. I'd like to especially thank Scott Rawls and his team for working with us on this effort, and we had a great announcement on that several weeks ago in Catawba County. It's great going there. Also, something that's been pressed to me by the universities and the community colleges and by Eric and by our great veterans leader right here, and that is in-state tuition for veterans at all 58 community colleges is very, very important. And we're also going to do the same thing with our universities, is in-state tuition for veterans at state universities through our new North Carolina Serves scholarships. Now, we're doing some other things with our universities that I think are quite exciting. This budget targets investments that I agreed to when the president came to visit North Carolina State University, and that we invest money in our budget to establish North Carolina State's next generation Power Electronics Innovation Institute. It'll be a great pilot for the rest of the nation. We'll measure its success and determine in the long term whether or not that funding should be long term or not. In addition, we are investing in a pilot program linking students at our historically black colleges and universities with North Carolina-based companies. That is extremely important, that our students who are putting so much investment in college and often a lot of debt have the opportunity to connect with colleges and with the industry, and we're going to do a pilot program at our major historically black colleges and universities. Now, another area of opportunity that I think is very important for economic development and growth to continue the Carolina comeback, and that is opportunities through transportation. And Secretary Tony Tata, he's on the road today working hard, but he has stressed a lot of things also in this budget. So therefore, we provided an additional $43 million for highway maintenance, preservation, and resurfacing, all which will enhance our state's highway infrastructure. This is very, very important. Before we build new roads, let's take care of the roads we have right now and the bridges that we have right now. We also increased funding for the strategic mobility formula. One of the, I think, the biggest pieces of legislation reform that this state has seen for the past 30 years, which was passed during our first session. I want to again congratulate our partners in the legislature. We feel it's working so well that we've increased the funding for the strategic mobility formula, which puts a greater emphasis on projects that create jobs, enhance safety, and also address congestion. We're also refining an investment program which Secretary Klutz has lobbied me hard on, along with Sharon Decker, our Commerce Secretary. They've twisted my arm time and time again, but they didn't really have to twist it. There's a historical tax credit that was sunsetting this year, and this administration believes that that's a very, very important program, both for urban centers and especially for rural small towns, where you have old abandoned mill buildings and vacant stores, that we want to give encouragement for reinvestment, because these are the living rooms of our towns, and they're very crucial for our economic development, investment, and recruitment, in addition to our quality of life in those towns. So we are refining this investment program to reward businesses that restore historical buildings to create jobs and invest in our towns and our cities. The program will also encourage investment in historical homes, and the emphasis with the homes will be in lower income neighborhoods and in rural areas. And that's one of the major adjustments we made based upon the old bill versus this new program that we're introducing today. We will also invest more resources to begin unleashing our oil and gas resources. John Scavarla and his team in Diener are working very hard with our energy director in ensuring that we can maybe get some pilot drills and find out exactly what resources are underneath our ground that we can unleash to help with our country's energy independence and help create jobs throughout North Carolina. And we've put money in our budget to begin that process. Now, while we have seen signs of recovery, we must do more. And Secretary Decker is continuing to work, and my budget has funding for creating a new approach to economic development that will be streamlined, flexible, and accountable, not only in recruiting new businesses to come to North Carolina, but I want to let you know that we're putting as much emphasis on retaining existing jobs in North Carolina. And we look forward to having some exciting announcements in the near future on some of the great work that Secretary Decker is doing in that area. Now, the quality of life of North Carolina is another very, very important part of this administration's strategy. My dad used to say when he was a small town city council member, he said, we must walk the fine line between continuing economic prosperity while also protecting the quality of life which brought many of us here. And that applies right here to North Carolina, from the mountains to the Piedmont to the coast. And we want to protect our natural resources and our water. And the fact of the matter is, there's been one issue that has been neglected in North Carolina for the past 60 years, and that is the coal ash issue. And that is why in my budget I am proposing an additional 19 positions to increase oversight in coal ash ponds throughout North Carolina. There will also be additional money in the budget for laboratory and field equipment that aids in the monitoring of our coal ash ponds throughout North Carolina. We also promise a new culture of customer service. I told Tony Tata we need to fix DMV. We had a great announcement recently in Cornelius and Huntersville area where we introduced the prototype DMV office, where we're going to reduce the waiting line for driver's license and other needs in our DMV, and it's already working. This budget pays for substantial technology upgrades that will allow customers to access DMV services through self-service kiosk, table computers, or smartphones, as well as through DMV call centers and high-volume DMV offices. We need to continue this progress because that saves our citizens time so they can have a great quality of life or be productive in their businesses. There's one other area that I talked about yesterday in Greenville, North Carolina, and that is the issue of addiction and substance abuse. And I also mentioned this in my State of the State speech during my first month in office. We will provide more resources to educate, enforce, and provide treatment for substance abuse and addiction, issues that are impacting our families, our communities, and our schools. As I said yesterday in Greenville, when a parent drops off there's 18 or 19-year-old child at a college campus, they're our responsibility. They're on our state property. They're on our university land. And we need to help protect them. And that includes enforcing the law of drugs and alcohol illegally being used, but it also involves helping people who may be addicted, because we want these kids to take advantage of the incredible universities and schools that we have throughout North Carolina. And you can't do that if you continue to destroy your brain. Now, the First Lady also wanted me to mention something very close to my heart and her heart and many other people's heart in North Carolina. And that is This budget proposal will include something to help puppy protection and deal with these puppy mills. This budget will transfer the animal welfare section of the Department of Agriculture to the Department of Public Safety, which our Commissioner of Agriculture agrees with, to provide greater coordination with local law enforcement, which will further help protect our household pets. And did you hear that? Affordability. Listen, one thing that the legislature and myself have been working on is how can we make this state affordable for families and also job creators and businesses throughout North Carolina. We made some tough decisions regarding tax reform, and I'm very, very pleased with the outcome of those decisions. But we also have to make other tough decisions to make this state affordable. We've asked all agencies to look for savings and increase their efficiencies. In fact, I personally decided to sell the state helicopter that many governors before me were using. I have yet to use it, primarily because of its high cost and inefficiencies, so we're going to sell it and put that money back into the general budget. We are also revising our film strategy in order to encourage long-term capital investments versus short-term projects with short-term returns. We think a better long-term strategy will benefit both the industry and also save tax dollars while also creating long-term jobs with long-term capital projects. Now, I got to be very straightforward here. Many departments and agencies will be implementing savings next year to meet our budgetary goals. They are also going to have to make some tough decisions. These agencies include my own office, the Department of Administration, Aldona Voss and DHHS, Secretary Gray with the Department of Revenue, the entire university system, and many others. We're all going to continue to have to look for ways to reduce spending and look for efficiencies. And we've based our budget upon continual savings and prioritizing what we need to have the impact, our affordability, and our quality of life, and the opportunity for the next generation. Now, we've reprioritized spending based upon our biggest needs, and that especially includes raises for our teachers and raises for our state employees. We're also putting money aside, and this is something my budget director has stressed from day one since I got here. We're putting money aside so we're better prepared for the unexpected. And these days, in the ever-changing world and competitive spirit and changing economy and what's happening in Washington throughout the world, you never know what will happen with the economy or with natural disasters. And our Pope and myself firmly believe that we have to have sufficient money in reserves to meet those needs. And thankfully, we made that decision last year also. Our budget will add $50 million to the state's saving reserve account. Our budget adds $50 million to the repair and renovation fund, which is actually more than is required by statute. And this is an issue we're going to be talking about later. Bill Daltridge and I are working, and every day we have so many buildings in state government that are in disrepair, that are unsafe, and frankly, some might need to be torn down in the near future because of their incredible inefficiency regarding day-to-day operations. Some may be even right near where we stand. And we need to budget for that in the future. And before we build any new buildings, Bill Daltridge and Art and others are stressing we're going to have maintenance dollars available. And this is a new concept in state government the past decade or two. In conclusion, we have made a lot of headway in the past year. I'm very, very pleased with what's been happening with the economy. We still have a long way to go, but a year ago we were the 5th highest, even at one time the 3rd highest unemployment rate in the country. I think we were barely beating California, Nevada, then we jumped ahead of New Jersey. Now we've jumped ahead of over 30 states regarding lowering our unemployment. And we've had to make some tough decisions to do that, but I think they're tough decisions which will have a positive impact, again, not only on today, but on future generations. This budget builds upon our accomplishments such as tax reform, unemployment insurance reform, and transportation reform. It builds upon these accomplishments with strategic investments, prudent spending, and continued reforms that were made last year, and a much-deserved and needed pay increase for teachers and state employees. Now, we welcome and we look forward to a great relationship with state legislators as they provide input and look for ways to improve upon this budget. As I was very pleased last year when I presented our first budget, I think well over 90% of that budget was accepted. And I think they will use this as a very positive framework, where in the past, governors' budgets were basically tossed aside and the legislature had to start from scratch. That didn't happen last year, and I don't anticipate it again happening this year based upon initial feedback that we've gotten from the legislature. But they also have a tough job, and I respect their job and their responsibility from the legislative branch. Now I'd like to thank all of you for your cooperation. I'd like to introduce my budget director, Art Pope, who will tell you some of the things also that we didn't do, which are listed here, that has been part of the past culture of state government. And when I was elected governor, I promised to change some of the old culture of state government, be much more transparent, have more accurate accounting, and be very direct with the people on what's working and what's not working. And when Art is done, the both of us will take a few questions, and then we're going to go back to the mansion afterwards and go see the NASCAR Hall of Fame drivers, who are good friends of mine that also, they play a crucial role in the future economic development and past economic development of North Carolina. So with that, Art, again, you've done an outstanding job. Your staff is aligned here. Tony, thank you also for helping very much. And y'all give Art Pope a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Governor, thank you for your kind words. And I also want to join in thanking the very professional, hard-working staff at the Office of State Budget and Management. Their job's not completed with the submission of this document, this recommended budget to the General Assembly. Their job's not even completed when the General Assembly enacts into law and the governor signs into law the next revised budget. In some ways, their job's just starting, because the State Budget Office and its staff's also responsible for literally closing the books on this year's state budget when it ends June 30th, then implementing, opening the books on the new budget to begin July 1st, and then the cycle starts again with the recommended budget for the next biennium. So thank you very much for your hard work. I'm going to start with the question that I've been hearing the most often asked in the news media, the public, and legislators, which is, with a shortfall of $445 million this fiscal year and a projected shortfall in revenue of $191 million in the next fiscal year, which this budget applies to for fiscal year 14-15, how can the governor recommend a budget that provides a $262 million pay increase for state employees and teachers and also funds the other programs and priorities he just highlighted? Well, first of all, do let me say, as the governor's refer back to the May 2nd consensus forecast on why we have a shortfall. This is a forecast required by statute on a consensus basis. It's available on the website if you haven't already received it. And it cited three reasons that this year's revenue were lower than originally forecast this time last year. First of all, we had lower than expected economic growth. We had economic growth, but it's lower than expected. Last year, the projection was for population growth of 1.4%, was only 1.1%. That may not sound like much, but that's a fifth less than expected. Personal income, subject to the personal income tax, was expected to grow 3.5%. In fact, it only grew 3.0%, 1/6 less than expected. And in particular, wages and salaries subject to withholding were expected to grow at 3.9%, but in fact only grew 3%, 1/4 less. So we're having a recovering economy. The economy is still growing, was less than forecast last year, which affected the revenue for this entire fiscal year 13-14. The second reason, though, is that the final collections on 2013 income was about $200 million less than projected. Now, the 2013 income was based on 2013 tax rates. This had nothing to do with tax reform and the new rates and standard deduction enacted for 14. And North Carolina is not unique. There are other states that are receiving, many other states receiving substantially less revenue because of what's called the fiscal cliff effect. In brief, in 2013, federal tax rates are going to go up. So people shifted income from 13 to 2012 under lower federal tax rate. They accelerated dividends, bonuses, realized capital gain, which is one reason why we had such a big increase in last year's income, last year's overcollection, because all that money was collected in around April of 2013 and was in last year's revenue. That money can't be taxed twice. It wasn't reported this year, and the effect was much more dramatic for North Carolina, as I said, other states that we have tracked, and that caused a $200 million decrease in revenue. Third, and this is a trend we recognized early, is that 2014 withholding from wages and salaries is substantially lower than was originally projected again last year. We have new tax tables for the first time since 1989 for withholding. And so because the new tax withholding tables are more accurate and the lower rate and higher personal deduction, we've seen a significant decrease in that withholding during 2014. In fact, we looked at the withholding rates for state employees, 75,000 sample, and in 2013, they averaged about 5.6% being withheld from their paycheck for state taxes. That dropped to 4.5%. That's a 20% reduction on state withholding of income taxes from state employees and other people, which is great for them, but that means the state doesn't have that revenue right now. In fact, North Carolina gets $2.2 billion a year in overpayment of taxes, which means you get $2.2 billion in refunds. So, but when you withhold more accurately and at lower rates, that means we're going to have less overpayments, which means that we should have less refunds next year, but that's going to be in April 2015, not in time to help this year's collections. So those are mainly the three reasons why we have a $445 million shortfall. All right, you still have a shortfall regardless of the cause. What are you doing with the shortfall this year? As the governor said, let me tell you the top 10 things the state is not doing for the shortfall. First, we have not delayed taxpayer refunds. We haven't delayed them by weeks or months, and then sometimes in the past, the tax refunds were deliberately delayed until July of the next fiscal year, so the state would have that cash balance from the taxpayers by not paying those tax refunds on time, delaying it to the next year. Over $120 million worth that was done in the year 2000. We have not done that. Second, the state has not kept any of the local government share of tax collections. As we know, the sales tax and other taxes are shared, collected by the state, then reimbursed or shared with local governments. In the past, that's been withheld. We did not do that. Third, we did not divert money from the Highway Trust Fund or other dedicated state funds. That also has been done often in the past. Fourth, we did not divert the contribution from the State Employees Retirement Fund. That's been done in the past. In fact, there was a lawsuit over it. Fifth, we did not furlough any state employees without pay. Sixth, we did not put off the payroll date, or the last payroll of the year for state employees and teachers from June until July, and just have 11 payments, 11 payrolls instead of 12. That also was done in 1991 and was not caught up and fixed until 1994. Seventh, we did not deplete the rainy day fund. Not only did we not deplete the rainy day funds, the governor indicated we added $238 million to it last year, and we're adding another $50 million to it this year. Eighth, we are not using non-recurring money for recurring expenses, either state non-recurring money or federal ARA funds, and I'll have a slide detailing that later. Ninth, we're not imposing any permanent or temporary tax increases in this budget to make up for a revenue shortfall. And 10th, we are not jeopardizing our AAA bond rating. The state treasurer, Janet Cowell, Dave McCrory, state controller, myself visited the bonding agencies back in March. We knew then already where the trend was going on withholding taxes. We didn't know then the extent or the amount of the 2013 impact, but we shared that with the bonding agencies. We told them how we were dealing with it, and our AAA rating is secure. That cannot be said for all states this year or North Carolina in the past. So, Governor, thanks to your sound budget, the budget enacted by the General Assembly, we are in good shape. Because what are we doing since we're not doing all those harsh measures and, to be blunt, sometimes accounting gimmicks? Well, first of all, the biennium budget last year didn't spend all the money. That's the best way to save money, is not to spend it to begin with. That's why this shortfall is a revenue shortfall, not an overall budget crisis. The fiscal year 13-14 budget left $323 million unappropriated at the beginning of the year. And then during the course of managing the budget this year, not spending money we didn't have to, even though if it was authorized by the General Assembly, we saved another $290 million in reversion. Well, 323 plus 290 is $613 million, less the $445 million shortfall, leaves you $168 million surplus. So without taking any of those extraordinary measures, we do have a surplus at the end of this year that becomes beginning credit balance next year, which you will see. Next, for the fiscal year 14-15, which was enacted last year, but this governor's budget revises in its recommendations, there was $428 million left unappropriated on the bottom line. So again, simple math, $428 million unappropriated, minus $191 million projected shortfall decrease in revenue leaves you $237 million in money still unappropriated that can be spent in this revised budget. And let me emphasize, and I'll point this out in a minute, that revenue is still increasing next year over this year. It's just increasing $191 million less than originally projected last year. So that is why, with sound budgeting practices, not spending all the money you have, working hard to save and accommodate the money, my thanks go to the secretaries. My thanks go to Superintendent June Atkinson, the public schools, which reverted $140 million. We are able to deal with this revenue shortfall without any harsh measures at all. And indeed, in this budget, we're able to go ahead and start with that beginning credit balance, the revenue that we, after subtracting that $191 million shortfall, and still have $262 million for the pay raise for teachers and state employees, add money to the rainy day fund, the repair and renovation fund, establish a Medicaid risk reserve, fund the other priorities, and still have $100 million unappropriated on the bottom line. And with that, are y'all seeing the handout? Okay, thank you. You already have a paper handout summarizing some of the key points that are in the green budget document. Now I'm going to go through this very quickly to leave time for questions. In very small print, you'll see the recommended budget, the top half being availability and revenue, the bottom half being appropriations. On the next page, you see the comparison of this year's recommended budget to the budget already enacted. So when we talk about increases and decreases, we're talking about an increase or decrease of next year over this year. However, the next page, page 4, is the fiscal year 14-15 enacted budget that was enacted last year, which is in the left-hand column, compared to the recommended budget with revisions, because we are changing the law, so you will also see increases and decreases compared to an enacted budget. In several key places through the budget, you'll see where there's a reduction, but it's a reduction of increase. For example, the average daily membership for the public schools is less than projected, so there's a reduction in the public schools budget for that. Not because we're cutting their spending, it's just that they don't need as much money as originally projected, because the enrollment is not as much as possible. What I will do is look at this slide, which is a little bit easier to see, and go back over those points I had. You'll see the unappropriated balance remaining from the previous year was supposed to be $323 million. However, you then see subtraction for the under collections this year of $445 million, but then you see the $290 million in reversion, which leaves you net $168 million beginning credit balance. So that is why we were not suffering from the shortfall, because we prudently budgeted for that last year. By statute, 25% of beginning credit balance goes to the Savings Reserve Account, the Repair and Renovation Fund. That's $42 million each. The governor's not satisfied with that amount, so he later in the budget appropriated an additional $8 million to those two funds to bring them up to $50 million each. Then have the subcredit beginning balance. You then have the consensus revenue forecast of $20,962 million. That number right there, as you'll see on the next page, is more than this year's forecast, this year's revenue, but less, $191 million less than what's originally forecast. The Department of Revenue has done a great job, Secretary Lyons Gray, in working with collection of out-of-state sales and use tax. We're due North Carolina, so we're expecting a revenue increase there. Some technical changes on FICA, how that is treated. So that's $44 million in additional revenue for a total availability of $21 billion. Total recommended appropriations is $20,990 million, leaving $100 million on the bottom line unappropriated and saved again. Now to go a little bit more into the comparison, this is the close-up showing fiscal year 13-14, this current fiscal year in the left-hand column, and the recommended budget for 14-15 the governor's proposing today. You will see that again, those top numbers show that beginning credit balance less than $445 million shortfall, $290 million reversion, leaves a same $168 million. That is much less than we had last year. Last year, we had a beginning credit balance of $733 million. The reason that beginning credit balance is so much last year, again, those are largely the overcollections from the positive effect for that fiscal year from the federal tax law change and reversions as well, whereas this year we only have the benefit of the reversions. So again, the same transfer to Savings Reserve Account. Now, if you go to the base revenue forecast, In the left-hand column, you'll see that this year's enacted budget had revenue of $20,603 million. The revised forecast this year is $20,962 million. So that's still $359 million in revenue growth, even with the revised forecast. Again, it's $191 million less than originally projected, but $359 more than the previous year. And going through to the total recommended appropriations, and you'll see we'll be spending approximately $359 million more this year than last year, which is a 1.7% growth in appropriations. Now you do the comparison to this year's recommended budget in the middle column compared to what was originally enacted last year in the left-hand column. The top numbers are basically all the same, but again, go down to base revenue, consensus forecast. You'll see originally last year, we were forecast to have $21,153 million in revenue. But again, because of all those factors we discussed in that consensus forecast, that was reduced to $20,962 million, or $191 million less. So that's where we take into account the shortfall compared to what's projected for this year. But I'm repeating myself for emphasis, that's still $359 million more than this current fiscal year. And you'll see total recommended appropriations. Everything working through, we're actually spending $8,500,000 less this year than originally recommended for this year, so very close. Again, 1.7% more than this current year, but only a fraction of a percent different than what was originally projected. Now, I do want to address an issue that we had last year, and it's been much discussed, and appropriately much discussed, by the public, by a report by Health and Human Services, working with the Legislative Oversight Committees and the news media, and that's Medicaid. Based on the information available as of April, we are projecting a Medicaid budget shortfall this year of $70 million state dollars. Sometimes it gets confusing because they talk about total dollars, which includes the federal share. I'm using state dollars only. Most of this funds we expect to be billed after June 30th. So these are pending claims, expenses incurred during this year, but have not been yet processed, but we expect to be processed next year. We are going to carry over this obligation to pay them in July. A lot of them we can't pay because we won't have processed the billings from the providers through HHS until July. But this is an important point. We are carrying over the cash within Medicaid and HHS to next year to match that obligation to pay those bills. Some of you may recall the state auditor did an audit of Health and Human Services focusing around the end of June 30th, 2012 fiscal year, and Medicaid bills are carried over without the cash to pay for it. We're carrying over the cash to match it. This means that $70 million less than would be reverting otherwise, but we're not counting the money twice. So in our reversions of $290 million, we have a list by agency and function where that money is coming from. We're not counting any money from Health and Human Services or Medicaid in those reversions for the general fund, because that money is going to be carried forward to meet these Medicaid bills. There's also another issue which has been treated different ways at different times in the past. The state receives a drug rebate for Medicaid, which approximately 1/3 is the state share and 2/3 is the federal share. Again, at times in the past, the state has treated that as 100% being state money was received in June, and then they don't have to pay the federal government its share until July. We are going ahead and treating the federal share as a federal share, and we're not counting that money in availability. Again, Governor McCrory gave very strict instructions. We're changing the culture. We're doing transparent accounting. Nothing's going to be carried forward without the money forward to pay for it. We consulted the state controller's office on the treatment of this, and we're following the evaluation by the state auditor. So we are treating the drug rebate money as only partly state share and subjecting the rest of it to be the federal share when it's due and paid. So those are not repeated in the reversions. Now then, in the budget, and we referred to this a couple of times, there's a possibility the $70 million shortfall number we were using could be wrong. There are a range of estimates, different ways to estimate it. The governor does not have a luxury of putting a range into the state budget. So we're using a number we think is most appropriate based on the information available. The legislature will receive additional information. They'll be receiving it probably this week or next week based on the expenditures and collections and receipts for the month of April, which we did not have. But because there is a variance in here, the governor's repeating a request he made last year of a Medicaid risk reserve to be funded at $50 million. So if the shortfall this year is more than 70 million, we have $50 million already in a reserve to make up that payment. And if the rebates or forecast for next year's Medicaid is off, that $50 million will be available as well. And if the money's not used for Medicaid, then it will be transferred to the rainy day fund next year. So we think that's very responsible budgeting. So we have $290 million based on the survey. And by the way, we've already received some information that number's probably going to go up. Went up last year. So as we get closer to the General Assembly enacting the budget, they'll have the benefit of more recent information, and that reversion number probably will go up, maybe over 300 million more. But we feel very secure about the $290 million. There have also been some questions and speculations. I commented about one of the things we're not doing is using non-recurring money for recurring expenses. That's a very poor budget practice. It's kicking the problem down the road. It creates structural deficits. It's been done in the past using state non-recurring money for recurring expenses, and during the Great Session using the federal money from the American Reinvestment Account Fund, from the American Reinvestment Fund. Here you'll see in the dark green, we had $20,980 million in recurring state money. Yet we're only spending on $20.8 billion recurring expenses. You'll see in the light green, the recurring revenue exceeds the recurring expenses, and we're using recurring revenue to fund part of our non-recurring expenses. So we're doing it the other way. We're using recurring money for non-recurring expenses. This includes that extra $8 million each, total of $16 million going to repair and renovation fund and the savings reserve fund above and beyond, setting aside part of the credit balance. Another way of looking at it, we have $110 million in non-recurring funds, but we're spending $140 million in non-recurring expenditures, and again, using recurring money to make it up for it. So that's a very sound budget process. And again, as the governor has indicated, we have increasing the state savings reserve account, also known as the rainy day fund, by another $50 million, to bring us up to $701 million. I wish it could be more, but yet there are some consequences to not having that bigger beginning credit balance, and this is one of the consequences. But still, it is a positive step to be rebuilding that rainy day fund, and the exact opposite of depleting it and relying on that for recurring expenses. Now, one of the reasons from the very beginning, Governor McCrory charged our budget office, our staff, to make sure we had sufficient savings, sufficient funds to give the teachers and state employees a pay raise, and that we're delivering that. You've seen most of this before. Again, very briefly, for teachers on the beginning pay steps for about through year 7, they're going to go from $30,800 to $33,000 a year. That's a 7.1% increase. And that's just a first phase of taking the $35,000 in the early phase of long-term career pathways for teachers reforms. Other teachers will have a increases that vary according to which step they're on. It's a blending of their advancing in step and lump sum increases. We have the detailed tables for how the new pay schedule will look like for the other teachers, and of course it will be part of the budget bill. Also, the highway patrol, magistrates and clerks of court, assistant clerks and full clerks of court have also been frozen on their pay steps just like teachers. So we're beginning to give them a little bit extra compensation, start unfreezing those steps, and help them with their recruitment and retention of highway patrolmen, magistrates, and clerks. Most state employees will receive an average of about $1,000, including benefits. So if you earn $50,000 or less, that's going to be more than 2%. If you earn over $50,000, obviously it goes down. We thought that was a more equitable way to do it, helping those who are earning less. And so you see the basic breakout there, how it goes. I'll give you more detailed breakout the next page. You'll see teachers and principals will receive $108 million. There are also a large number of public school system employees who are not teachers. They will see $53.8 million in increases. Community college, 18.5. UNC system, 33.4. General government, health and human services, you'll see all the other ones. The magistrates and clerks step increase, $6.4 million. The highway patrol partial step increase, $1.4 million. And justice and public safety, which also includes the prisons, that's why the correction system has a large number of employees at $27 million. And natural economic resources. That's a total of $262 million, rounded up to $263 million. a commitment made by Governor McCrory and delivered in this budget despite a revenue shortfall. We also are doing our reserves and salary benefits. The annual retirement contribution is being made, $7,210,000. The COLA comes out to about 1.9%, that's $70 million. And the minus $56.4 million, again, in careful, prudent budgeting, last year's biennium budget set aside $56 million in reserve for future benefits. Well, those future benefits are the $70 million for the COLA adjustment. So what we basically did was added the 14 million to the future benefits raised to 70 million, then we had to back that back out. So it's $70 million for the COLA benefits. So Governor, I appreciate your leadership and we're happy to answer any questions.
Let me make just a few comments here. First of all, I want to recognize Cornell Wilson, who's our military advisor, General. It's great having you here. Eric Duquesne and Nick Tennyson, my Deputy Secretary of Transportation. It's great having you all here, too. Thank you all very much. And got several other members of my team. I especially want to thank, I wish y'all, I could have had a camera from this angle watching the reporters' faces while Art explained the budget, because now y'all know how I felt during hour after hour after hour with not only Art, but each one of these people, because your look was just amazing. I wish some of your editorial writers would have been in here too, but that's another comment. Okay. With that, I'm proud of the work the budget team did. I don't want to see y'all again for a while, but it's been a wonderful time. And I'm very, very proud of our budget director and his team. And I'm also proud, one of the promises I made when I came to office, I was going to surround myself with very, very smart people. And my cabinet and my team exceeds that expectation. And you could see that by Art Pope's presentation. So thank you all very much. And we're here to take just a few questions. And then Josh Elliott will cut us off, and we're going to go talk to some NASCAR. Junior Johnson. Yes, sir.
Governor, this budget would cut universities about $49 million. Is that going to increase pressure to raise tuition and reduce services?
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to have Art kind of explain the details of that number that you just presented so you can hear all sides of that argument. And Art, if you don't mind this, because he can present it much better than I can, but we've spent a lot of time in communicating this to the universities and to others, because there are several factors involved regarding enrollment and several other factors. So I'm going to have Art explain that in just a second.
If you go to page 40 of the budget books, you'll see the beginning of the reductions for the university system. And I want to emphasize again what I said earlier, that $49 million is not a reduction from this year. It's a $32 million reduction from this year. It's a $49 million from what was originally budgeted this coming year. About $7 million of that, for example, is decrease in funding for the universities because their enrollment is going down, plain and simple. Also, some of the reductions will not result in any reduction of funding for the university system, because we do, for example, propose in there that for private scholarships for out-of-state students, that those scholarships pay the out-of-state tuition rate, just as we have made that change already for athletic scholarships, which means that the university receiving the higher out-of-state tuition rate and not lose any money when the state saves money from that area. Also, the governor prioritized the reductions we do have, for example, to try and minimize the impact on the classroom. So, for example, you'll see in there a list of reductions for centers, about $13 million. Many of those centers form core academic functions. They're integrated with the degree awarding programs, have hundreds of students participate in it. Some of those centers have 0 students participate in it, are not core to the education mission. But there, the governor gave the discretion and flexibility to the Board of Governors, and they can delegate to the trustees to identify where those savings should be. Then overall, the management flexibility is being given again, as requested by the university, for them to identify further savings. And we did identify some savings ourselves. For example, there's $9 million excess in payments over above the university's actual utility bills. So simply have accurate, transparent budgeting utility bill at what it should be, around $9 million extra, just good budgeting. We've been working with the Board of Governors and the General Administration on these, so they're very familiar with them.
We've actually been on the phone with the chairman of the Board of Governors this morning and some of their leadership team. And so that we've been in the loop with not only the universities but the community colleges in June and the whole council state during this whole process. So But again, these were some of the tough decisions that had to be made, but we think they're the best long-term decisions. And not only did the universities have to make some cost-saving adjustments, but so do many departments underneath my responsibility. Yes, sir, in the back.
Governor, when you talked about revising the film strategy,
Yes.
what exactly does that mean as far as the film industry is concerned? What do you mean by focusing on a long-term strategies?
We're basically setting up a tax structure very similar to treating it almost as a nonprofit, but where you get, we're wanting to encourage capital investment that is on the ground for the long term, whether it be in any city in North Carolina, which will really encourage more of the long-term long-term studios and full-time employment for many years, as opposed to a short-term commercial or a TV show coming in for a brief period of time, or what we saw during the Democratic convention several years ago was when, for example, The Daily Show would come in and get several $100,000 credit, and that was money right out of our budget, which we could have given to teachers. But we'll give you more detail on exactly how the breakdown is, but it's almost treating it where they get exempted from sales tax and other taxes based upon the taxes they actually pay in North Carolina. I think that's quite accurate, isn't it? Yes, sir.
Your $1,000 increase for state employees for salary and benefits. Can you break that down? How much of that is going to actually get benefits, and how much are they going to actually?
Art, why don't you get in details on that?
$809 in cash in the paycheck, and the remaining amount is for benefits. That may vary according to overall salary because it's a lump sum. So depending upon your overall compensation level, it may vary. On average, we calculate that to be $809 for the pay and the remainder for the benefits.
Let me get you, the purple tie or the blue, and if you could introduce state your name too. I haven't done that. I apologize. And who you're with?
Dan Bush with ED News in Washington. The
Right.
budget proposes funding for 19 full-time jobs in Diener for coal ash spill regulation. Can you talk about how the administration came up with that number?
Secretary Scavarla, he is not here today, and I apologize. I don't have anyone representing Diener, but he gave a very specific proposal based upon the number of coal ash they have in North Carolina, and I think also on the increasing the inspection rate of the coal ash ponds. I think, in fact, we were since my administration came in, and I'm going to let Secretary Scavarla correct me if I'm wrong, we actually increased the inspection during my tenure beyond what the regulations require, but we need more workforce to continue that and even increase it more, especially with the safety of the dams is our major issue with that. And so that was a recommendation directly from Secretary Scavarla and his staff, and it's a pretty substantial investment. Yes, sir.
Trip Gabriel from the New York Times.
Trip. Welcome to spend some money while you're here.
If the General Assembly on the subject of education sends you a bill that repeals the Common Core, is that something you would sign?
What I anticipate is I anticipate us finding common ground on Common Core. And I think a lot of the issues have nothing to do with the establishment of high standards, especially in math and reading, which I think everyone's for. It's more of how we implement Common Core and the execution of Common Core regarding the testing. And that's where I'm going to be working with Eric Buchanan and June Atkinson and the Lieutenant Governor and the education committees on how can we better execute the process of Common Core. I think what's happened with Common Core is there's been a lot of everything that goes wrong in education now, everyone's, well, that was Common Core. And it's frankly hard to separate what's what. And the same thing happened with Race to the Top. A lot of the things were directly related to Race to the Top, which was a federal program, had nothing to do with Common Core. So that's where we need an extensive study, is what actually was Common Core, what are the issues related to it, and then also what are some other testing issues that have nothing to do with Common Core, but frankly we've got to fix. And that's where Eric Buchanan is going to be working on that issue, working very, very closely with the legislature. Yes, sir.
Gary Robertson, Associated Press. Can you tell me what the decision-making was regarding these increased hospital and LME MCO provider assessments, say $75 million?
Yeah, that was a very tough subject to deal with, some very, very tough decisions in which we had some extensive conversations with the hospitals, especially UNC and East Carolina. And
This is a separate issue.
oh, I'm sorry, this is a separate issue. I'm going to let Art talk about this other issue. We had about 3 hospital issues during this time, and your acronyms are killing me right now, Gary.
The state of North Carolina already has an assessment program with both healthcare providers for physical health, where there's an assessment which the state retains part of, and they used to draw down the maximum amount of federal money for the services they provide. The LME MCOs provide mental health. They do not participate in that program. And other states, they are eligible for participating in that. So North Carolina will be joining other states in doing that. This is based on advice from council and HHS and looking what other states do. So it'll be the first time they do it, but the net effect should be the LME MCOs will be whole, the state will save money, and according to the laws and rules as written, we'll be maximizing the federal dollars to help cover those costs.
I think it's a very wise decision that we made, taking advantage of the federal dollars that are available right now, and I think it's a very positive change for both us and the hospitals. I'm sorry, I thought you were referring to another subject which I won't follow up on. Gary, thank you very much. Yes, sir. Right here, either one.
Notice in your budget you don't deal with the potential move of the SBI. Some lawmakers are already floating that as an idea that they did last year and you weren't in favor of it. Do you look any more favorably at that this year, or do you think the SBI ought to stay?
We did not put that in our budget. I have not heard the arguments regarding the advantages as of yet. I didn't last year, but I'm going to have my secretary, Frank Perry, meet with the legislatures to find out if, in fact, are there efficiencies, and then once they relay that information to me, I'll make that decision whether to support that or not. But I have not seen the detailed report on what efficiencies or collaboration would be impacted in a positive way. And if there are, I will consider it, but I have yet to see that detailed conversation exist. So I'm waiting to have Frank Perry, my secretary, Frank Perry, talk to the legislators who are interested in that proposal. Yes, ma'am.
Chris Hope from North Carolina Health News. Looking here at the pre-K funding and noticing that some of the money is coming from TANF block grants. How's that going to affect TANF, which tends to fund things like food stamps and other benefits for low-income families?
Art, do you want to give a quick comment on that, Tanif?
Overall, the TANF block grant funding is increasing. Sometimes in the past, it's been left to the legislature to allocate that additional funds. The governor, McCrory, in last year's budget and this year's budget, applies those funds where they can most be needed. So we did both use TANF funds. We also used additional lottery money for pre-K and bringing it up to the maximum it was beforehand. So again, it is a legitimate strategy to use additional federal funds or maximize federal dollars to fund crucial state needs and free up and save state dollars for other needs, including the pay increases.
Yes, sir.
Paul O'Connor with the Insider. This
Thank
might be a
you.
question that Art
Oh, wait a minute. I'm really hurt by that. Sorry, go ahead and ask.
It's there's a teacher wrote a letter together from one of the local papers recently saying that she would prefer the $1,000 because she makes less than $50,000, so 2%. She's actually going to get a smaller raise than everybody else.
She's less than 50,000?
Yeah, she's making less than $50,000, so is
No,
there,
actually, that's-
with all the steps and everything in there,
Yeah.
The short answer, I don't know without knowing what pay step she's on, and she doesn't know because she's not seen the new pay step schedule. That's why we have available. Elizabeth Groverstein, our senior budget officer for education, has 8.5 by 11 copies of the new pay schedule. It will be in the budget bill spelled out. And the pay steps, as you advance pay steps, depending on which step you are, your advance may be 1.2%, 1.7% or more. Some teachers, aside from the first 7 years less experience, some teachers receive as much as 4.3% increase. So this individual teacher, without not knowing more of her level of experience and where she is, she may be mistaken as to how much increase she's going to get.
This is one reason we had a very difficult job of just applying every increase to every employee, because each employee is in a totally different circumstance. And we found not only that true with teachers, but also with highway patrol and magistrates and other areas of specially stepped up programs. So that was one problem, one reason we put averages in our releases to you, because you'll find circumstances where someone's much more and someone might be slightly less. So that's the complication we have. Let me take two more questions and then we'll get going.
Bo Minnick, WNCN. Governor, you mentioned that many agencies will have to make tough decisions in the future here to meet your goals. Could you maybe elaborate on that? Is there a target that you're looking at in terms of a number, in terms of further cuts across the board at agencies?
No, I think the budget clearly reflects the numbers, but I will say this, my cabinet team, we're constantly looking at, in fact, some of the legislation we're going to be seeking is in personnel laws and giving us more flexibility to move people, for example, transfer people over 30-some miles, which isn't allowed at this point in time. We're even looking at certain personnel policies where if we lose a person due to retirement or something, where we can have a system where we don't necessarily fill that job because we combine that job for other people to do, but then we can increase the pay of that person who takes on more responsibilities. So this is the flexibility that we're seeking. So we would increase the pay of an individual maybe by a large percentage. I'll probably read about it in the paper, but a large percentage, but in fact then we return maybe 20 or 30% of the money savings back into the general budget, which would allow us to make other priority decisions. And this is the type of flexibility that we're looking at in our personnel laws that Neil Alexander and my cabinet secretaries are having constant conversation about. And we just do not have that type of flexibility at this point in time. Let me, one more question here. Yes, ma'am.
Jessica Jones with North Carolina Public Radio, and I just cannot resist asking this question. You mentioned the puppy mill bill again, which everybody knows here is one of my favorite topics, but you know, we know that didn't fare so well in the Senate last time, so my question is, did you throw Senate President Tilburger a bone on this?
With lots of meat on it.
What are you going to do to?
Well, one of the things we're doing is recommendations we have in our budget is we're transferring the enforcement from agriculture over to public safety. And we think that's a very good plan. And we're going to be also recommending some other aspects of the puppy mill bill. But believe me, we're not going to give up. We think public opinion is with us. We think the general public is with us. And the First Lady is with us. And so is my dog, Mo, who has a new website. And he'll be talking about it shortly on his new website. So we'll be lobbying very heavily. But we've made some changes as a result to give more comfort to the agricultural industry, to ensure that we're talking about pets and puppy mills and not agricultural animals at this point in time. All right, I'm going to do one more and then we're stepping out. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, I see that you have money sent in the HHS budget for the beginning stages, as you put it, of Medicaid reform.
Yes.
What we've heard from the leadership in both chambers is that they don't think they're going to have the time or the bandwidth to address that issue this year. Are you an optimist?
We have no choice but to be an optimist because, as Art clearly mentioned, you know, when I came into office, we had about a $530 million misprojection or misforecast. This year it was 90?
70 million. Right?
70 million. We've kind of fallen in between 50 and 90. We do not know what it might be next year until we get more consistency in the program. And Aldona Voss, Secretary Voss, who I'm telling you, she has just done an outstanding job, and I hope she gets the headlines that she deserves for the work that she does as opposed to some of the other criticism during the past 12 months. She has worked tirelessly to come up with what we believe is a strategic implementation and a systematic, common sense change of our current system. And Secretary Voss and I will be going out on the road next week to promote this new system with doctors, with hospitals, with other people in the medical community and nursing homes to talk about why it's so important to begin the steps to reform Medicaid. But I'll just tell this to my legislative colleagues, is that the longer we wait, the more difficulty we're going to have. And we think this is a very systematic, common sense approach that Secretary Voss and her team have put together. And again, we're going to be going outside the Beltline to make our case, and then hopefully those people will come inside and express the importance of it. So no, we're not going to give up. And listen, it's a very, very complex subject, and it is in showing respect for my legislature, it's a very tough short session subject, but it's a subject that has a sense of urgency because of the amount of money in addition to the quality of service that is required for Medicaid. Thank you all very much. It's an honor to be here.